Welcome to the program, and I'm your host, Greg Fenton. Each week we explore topics and ideas related to the experience of people with conflict and look to promote the profession of conflict resolvers. We are available to connect with at fentonmediation@gmail.com and at 647-227-4734. Check out the Facebook page for Mediation Station and the group page also to ask to become a member. Also visit the YouTube channel called Fenton Mediation to see videos of past shows. Listen to podcasts of Mediation Station on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Please follow us at our Twitter account, which is at Fenton Mediation. The conversation today is called The Deep Dive into Mediation Series, Part 3, The Subconscious. With me today will be Dawn Kuhlman, and she'll be with me very shortly. The program is live each Sunday night from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Special to note that just happened like last night, I guess, or this morning. Who knows the context? So yeah, we're live 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and Dawn is connected at 7 p.m. Central Mountain Time, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. So we will engage in conversation with everyone attending, able to listen and watch the conversation. Microphones and webcams will be closed, and if anyone wants to contribute anything, there are two options. One option is to see the chat icon as a bubble at the bottom center of your screen for you to click to then type in a comment or question and then click to send. Or you can click on the reactions icon, also located at the bottom center of your screen. And within that, you click on the hand icon to see, and you will then have your microphone open for you to speak. And then we will close it after that piece of your commentary or your question is completed. The show is being recorded for both video and audio purposes that will be uploaded for public access on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts afterward. So today, we are talking about the Deep Dive into Mediation Series, Part 3, The Subconscious with Dawn Kuhlman. That means there was Part 1 and Part 2, right, Dawn?
That's right.
My math just tells me that there were two other parts to this.
Or we just throw in numbers. We just make stuff up.
Well,
We do that.
that can happen. It's about randomness, right? Life is full with unexpecteds and you never know. So why don't we just do the show that way?
Next week, Part 7.
Well, I see you've been working on your math skills too, just like me. So welcome back to the program and the show tonight. Thanks for returning.
No, I'm never coming back. This is it. It's the third and final. I'm just teasing.
Oh, I was scared. We'll never see how long we can get this to sustain itself.
Keep going.
So, this has been a journey for the two of us with regard to going deeper, delving deeper within mediation to bring things to the surface, so to say. Why are you so interested in this type of conversation?
I think it's been fun. So when I started as a mediator in 2003, I really think there was a lot of what I would just call basic fundamental components to mediation in terms of, what people would say problem solving, negotiation, like creating the framework for it. When I came on, I feel like all of that was really being honed, and I could be off on my timetable, if you will, but for me, I feel like the framework at that point had sort of been set, and that was the foundation for further growth and mediation. And so I remember in around 2006, I started looking at, personality disorders and mediation. That was really the buzzword at the time. And Bill Eddy had put out some stuff. And I remember just being enthralled that we were looking and sort of doing this crossover between psychology and mediation, because I had been a mediator for the courts. And so it was a ton of legal perspective in terms of how people were going to resolve conflict, what the focus of those conflicts were. And so now here we are in the late 2000s, going into, well, up to 2010. And we're really starting to look at what I would call the psychological characteristics of conflict or mediation. And so I've had a lot of fun. So at that point, I remember some of my journey was personality disorders. Then I got into just personality in general. So I did a huge crossover between the Myers-Briggs and mediation for a huge amount of time, handful of years. Then I got into what's called motivational interviewing, which is also like a psychological way of approaching problems. And we just keep going. We just keep trying to find these new ways to create these multifaceted ways of conflict resolution, still keeping at the fundamental core of it in terms of I still work from a 5-stage model, even though I use all these other models and use all these other ways of looking at these problems. And I think it's just starting. Like every year I have like, well, why don't we look at this in mediation? Why don't we do this? And so I think it's fascinating. I think it's never going to get old. I think you can take any field and apply it to mediation easily.
Well, it may never get old if you have that sense of openness that, you don't know it all, and that's it. That's the way to do it. That's the template, and that's therefore, this is what I'll do only. And that, when people come into the process, that you fit them into that process rather than seeing how each person's an individual, comes from a very diverse perspective from the next person, and that maybe it might be another way to adapt the process for the people, make it more, this thing we'll talk about later more, make it client-centric.
Yeah, and I think people come in, and that's also been part of this journey. People come in with bigger problems than just what mediation can address. And I'm not saying that mediator is supposed to address issues beyond that. I just think, though, that we should have an understanding of it. And I think it can help us be better mediators, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's diversity of approach.
Yeah.
There is a template, there's a framework.
Yeah.
And then what do we do with that?
Yeah. What do we do when the framework doesn't work?
Well, keep adjusting and modifying it to see how it can, adapt to the person and their situation.
I have a little oh shit toolbox. That's where all of this comes from.
Can I see it?
It's getting bigger every year, thankfully.
How do you carry it around? Like you do weights or something?
I was gonna say, yeah, I got to lift to carry it around.
It's a virtual mindset of your toolbox.
Tools, resources, tips, tricks, knowledge, metaphors. Yeah.
So your brain's expanding.
I hope so.
You're testing its limits. I don't know, pushing its boundaries. Had a show on the conversation of the brain, basically, about, I think, October 24th, I think, the show.
Okay.
And about the front end, the rational, and then the back end, the emotional based.
Not so rational.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and all that, the spectrum, and then the space in between.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it's awesome that we are starting to look at the brain. I mean, when you think about mediation, and I know we're going to dive into this tonight, but you're looking at how the brain thinks, feels, decides. Why wouldn't we think about that in mediation? I mean, that's the process right there.
Well, I think a question to ask is, do we even consider that we have, quote, this construct called the brain, and that it's actually an asset to consider and factor into? Like some people just go through life in a sense of disconnected from oneself.
So I might jump into something just a little bit. So right now I'm reading this book. It's called The Secret Life of the Mind by Mariano Sigman. And literally it says how your brain thinks, feels, and decides, right? So he's got actually like 2 or 3 TED Talks, and he is a researcher over in, I think he's in Italy. And so he says we've had a lot of focus on the psychology of decision making. And now it's time that we start to look at the brain in decision making. Like for the first time in the 21st century, we actually have tools that can actually see the brain during the decision making process to figure out like chemically what's happening in terms of ions and all these big words that I don't understand. But I think that that is part of what I think we're going to dive in today too, is just there is so much happening. And what we talk about is the micro level, the macro level, there's so much happening that I think it's time that we start to dissect these little moments so we can figure out like, how is the brain processing that? How is the brain sitting here for 2 hours, adamant about one thing when they come in the door and yet leaving doing something else? What is happening in that process to make that happen? And so, I mean, I think that we should be curious to figure that out, and we should try to understand what's happening.
Yeah, ideally, yes.
Yes.
And that's what we're trying to promote by having conversations like this, to unpack a lot of the things that we may take for granted about ourselves, and especially as persons who mediate with people who are experiencing challenges and struggles in their lives and need some kind of process, some formal frame in order to help support them to get the clarity and slash maybe the decisions they need in order to move along in their lives with regard to any kind and range of matter situations in their lives, right? How about you share a little bit about you too? Just let's unpack you a little bit more again.
Well, I've got my tools. I've got a suitcase. So I have, there's always a story behind a story. And in 2013, I was diagnosed with complex trauma. And so I had no idea really what complex trauma, true story, in passing. Talk about traumatizing someone who's already traumatized. My therapist, true story, she's just going through stuff. She's like, okay, well, people who have complex trauma, and then she just keeps talking, and then like the session ends, and I'm like, I go home and I Google complex trauma. And I was like, and I have a master's in psychology, but I was not aware of what complex trauma meant. Like that, this was 20 years postgraduate school. I think the field has started to change a little bit since I had gone through. The DSM had been revised like twice. I think I was on the DSM-4, and then there was like a DSM. There was a couple revisions after that. Anyway,
just check in. What's the DSM?
The Diagnostical Statistical Manual, something like that. It's what mental health professionals use to put a label on you when they're trying to categorize your mental health issues. I don't even use it. I haven't used it since graduate school. So that tells you I do mediation now. So, so she tells me I've got this complex trauma. So I go home and I Google it. And I'm not kidding when I say I was traumatized by having to Google complex trauma. And I was like, okay, I don't think I'm well. I don't think this is good. And if I'm not well and I'm not good, how do I get better? And that actually started a huge journey of self-discovery. And so, that's been the other part of this, is that it's not just something that's in a silo. Like I'm taking everything that I'm learning about my brain body experience and how to get it back on track in terms of regulation, and then figuring out how can I help people who I see struggling in my sessions doing the same exact thing. So in 2013, I actually started reading this amazing book, and I have it here because I did a training on Friday, sitting right here. The Body Keeps the Score. I think everybody knows, a lot of people know this book.
You pull it up just to see the author? Who's the author?
Yeah, it's Bessel van der Kolk. So when I read this book, the right side of my face started going numb, and so then I go back to my therapist, and I tell her I'm reading this book, and she's like, I tell her about my face going numb, and she's like, yeah, you should probably read that in small doses. And I'm like, okay, yeah, probably other things that I should have known, but it's called The Brain, the Mind, and the Body and the Healing of Trauma. And so, we have a lot of people who are experiencing trauma when they come in, and there's so much happening with the brain, the mind, and the body. And so that has been my journey since 2013 to really understand the brain, the mind, the body better for my own selfish reasons. And then taking that knowledge and figuring out how we can apply it to the people who come in our offices.
Right. Well, that's taking a trauma-informed approach.
Yeah.
And you did develop and do deliver trauma-informed mediation process.
Yep.
Right. So
Definitely. And you can't, I'm going to go deep for a minute. Can I do this?
absolutely.
All right. So there is an amazing author that I follow by the name of Rob Bell. And I watch him speak all the time. And I think I may have even talked about him on your shows before. And so Rob Bell had like this curve. So he draws this curve. So when he does his live shows, they are like math equations and stories and pictures and Instagram. Like he's all over the place. He's an awesome teacher. So he draws like this curve, or maybe I drew the curve. I can't remember whether I learned it and went home and made up my own model off of his or how this worked. But I remember seeing a curve. And basically, you have the part of yourself who goes through like this experience. And when you're in this experience or you're in whatever's happening to you, you are thinking, why is this happening to me? This is the worst thing that could ever happen in my entire life. Like, you just totally, woe is me, victim mindset stuff. And then you come out of it. So it's like the caterpillar who then now has become this butterfly. And the butterfly can never go back to being a caterpillar, right? Like you have all this history, you have all these things you can't change about yourself. And you often sometimes wonder, well, why did that happen? And then you say, this is why, because in order for me to become this, I had to go through this, right? Like this transformation that has to occur. And the only way that it could have occurred is for you to have done hard shit. That's the
Hardship.
only,
What context? What do you mean by that?
anything hard, whether it's like trauma, anything hard in your life. Like if you want to learn, if you want to develop, like sometimes that's the only way you could get to that. And so the only way for me that I could have created a trauma-informed mediation model was to actually been healing my trauma as I was going through it.
So
Otherwise, nothing, that would have never happened for me. So it's like, on the one hand, you think that really sucked. I had all this stuff. And on the other hand, you think about all the people I can help by having this model and how much I've learned by going through that. And so, when I'm in mediation sometimes with people and they're like, it's hard. There's a really good mindfulness quote that I'll say, and it might not seem appropriate, and I can see where people might want to challenge me on this, but I'll say to people, this is the best moment of your life. And people will just look at you like, why is this? And it's based upon a mindfulness concept, because this moment is going to lead to the next moment, which is going to lead to the next moment. And that is how growth occurs. And that is how change occurs. And so you have this opportunity with this best moment of your life, whatever that might look and feel like, even though it feels horrible, to make a decision that's going to lead to the next best moment of your life. And that's what life is just a series of making these decisions to get us through to the next thing.
yeah, maybe it's, instead of saying this moment is the end point, it's actually about opening up a new door, another pathway.
It's always an opening to a new pathway. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it sucks. Sometimes it's hard. And then I've had people look at me with tears in their eyes. Like, how is this the best moment of my life? And I'm like, because this is the moment where you have the opportunity to make change, to do something different.
Yeah, and you're sort of in a way calling it out to raise it to the conscious level, to bring it to their attention as a catalyst to help.
It is. It's empowering. It can be challenging, but it can be empowering too, to take that, like you said, and move it forward, bring it forward, and
Yeah,
then transforming it to something else.
yeah. Reformatting it, reframing it from the
Mhm.
negative, how
Yeah.
people perceive it and feel it, and live it as being destructive, negative, hopeless, helpless, to an opportunity to transform it, as you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
It takes courage to do that, I would say.
Yeah. For me or for them or for all of us, for me to say that or for them to do it.
Well, I'll unpack that one at a time. Yeah, for you to say that, yes, because it's all connected to this other concept I'll say in a second.
Yeah.
It's, yeah, for you to bring that to light, especially about yourself,
Oh,
and also then to provide that space for another, the people you're, communicating that with, to then try to encourage them to connect with that idea. It's going to our spaces of vulnerability, which is really uncomfortable for many people. It's the fear of going into that space, because then how do I navigate? How do I deal with that? Because that represents a lot of challenge and struggle. And I don't want more struggle and challenge in my life, and unpredictability, because that's also what vulnerability represents to me. I don't know how the pathway will open up, or what the experience will be like, and how I'll be affected from it and with it.
yeah. I had he was actually a judge from Kansas. He attended one of my trainings and I had shared some stories of things. And he sent me a really nice email post training. And he said, Dawn, I wholeheartedly believe that you've been through all of that so you can continue to help people. And I swear that's the only, just again, it's one of those things. It was I've been transformed into something else to do something else. And sharing part of that journey. I'm still secretive about some parts of it, which is funny. It's funny the stuff that people are secretive about in terms of their past and their stuff. But for the most part, I share in my
So
story, and
is
people
it's,
can,
go
yeah,
ahead. You
no,
finish your
and
thought.
but people can relate. I mean, I think people need these moments of connection in terms, like you said, these vulnerabilities. Those are the things that connect us, and yeah, I don't like to sit and talk. And it is, I will say this, you do have to find that balance between self-disclosure and it becoming your therapy hour.
You mean
You
as a
know,
mediator, or?
yes, or for anybody in general. You just have to say these things happen to me and this is now where I'm going with it, versus these things happen to me and now I'm going to waller in this for the next, um, so yeah, you do have to kind of find boundaries on how and when and the best ways to self-disclose that information. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a growth thing and a journey
Yeah.
too, to develop one's skills, one's awareness. You know, I take the view that the process is not about me; it's about the people that we work to assist, who are there in the process, and to have that as the foundational template. Though, of course, we are within that space, and we are affected from the space and the vicarious trauma possibilities, etc. And
Yeah.
also we are affecting the space and the people within that space as well. We're influencers.
Yeah. So it's fun because, I have a section in my class when I teach both core and domestic mediation, and but I do a whole section on verbal and nonverbal. And part of the verbal side, we have this list, and we'll talk about, I'll say, is it appropriate to self-disclose in mediation? And it's always a really good conversation. And there's a wide range in terms of what people think is appropriate. And yeah, I think you have to navigate it. You have your own comfort level. You have to make sure that what you're sharing is still appropriate or relevant, or maybe speak more in metaphors rather than direct stories. I think there's lots of ways to do it, but everybody has to find their own style. And then make
Yeah.
sure you get feedback on your style, because, yeah.
Well, yeah, feedback forms of some form
Yeah.
for the individuals who participated in it to give you their perspective of what the
Yeah.
journey
We
was
had a
like.
gentleman who wanted to start his opening monologue saying that he had been through a divorce. And that's why and I was like, I don't know if the opening monologue is the place I don't know. That seems, yeah.
It's more, what I'm hearing from that is that, so this is all about you. I thought me as a party,
Yeah.
I thought it was about me and my
That's a
stuff with
good,
this other person.
I couldn't put my finger on it what quite, yeah, I was like, ooh, yeah, it's a time to connect your time, but there's a different way to have that. You don't want that negative, that felt like a negative intimacy connection to me. Like you want to connect through some positive ways first. And then, if at some point later that comes out, but,
Yeah.
yeah, the opening monologue just seemed like like not a good place to put that.
Well, I see us as being responsible for creating the conditions that people that we're engaging to open up for themselves, to connect with. And then whatever we do has to be strategic,
Yeah.
intentionally, mindfully placed to occur from your toolbox that you have, your
Yeah.
inventory of stuff, to
Yeah.
then apply and incorporate in the process to help build upon.
Yeah. As you say that in my mind, I was thinking, so you said strategic, and in my mind, I thought of a mental map because it is this toggle between you are connected with them on one level, like you're trying to be present with them. And sometimes though, on the same level, you're trying to think about where you're taking them. So you're toggling back and forth between where am I taking you or where are we going with this? I am present with you. And maybe I'm all wrong. Maybe I just need to just be totally present and then it'll work itself out. But sometimes I feel like I've got to have a mental map. You've also got to take it places, it's that servant leadership concept that I love.
Yeah, I'll look at it from a point of view that I don't take anybody anywhere. It's more like they take themselves somewhere. I
Yeah.
create the conditions for them to connect with, why are they there? What do they need in order to get where they ideally want? What can I do to help them to get there? To create that pathway, walking along with them
Yes.
rather than leading them. I don't
Yes.
want to lead anybody. I don't want to
Yeah.
follow anybody either, because
Yeah.
I want to have them have the sense that they're supported along with their journey.
There's actually some research on that. I swear to goodness, I did not prep this one. This is the book, Sean Aker.
Hey,
So he's
hey,
got
look,
this.
I'll just sidebar here. You said about my books in the back.
I do have a stack of books right here in front of me. So Sean Aker, so he's a positive psychologist at Harvard. At least he used to be at Harvard. I don't, he's got a ton of TED Talks too. He's hilarious. He's crazy. Really good resource on like perception. He's done a lot of research on like how to rewire your brain for positivity. Anyway, but he talks about that concept that you're just talking about in terms of if people think that they have to do something alone, I think they have like a 30% chance success rate. If the people think that there is someone doing it with them, it jumps up to like 70%. And that's how I envision mediators too, that whole idea of coming alongside. And, it's that language that we use too. Like, how are we going to do this? What do you think we should do next? Right. Like I say we a lot, and this idea of how are we going to navigate these next 2 hours? So absolutely, I think there's actually a lot of psychological benefit to this idea of I'm alongside of you, trying to help you through
Yeah,
this.
yeah, and I agree with the we piece, because we are part of the process. We are within that space.
Mm-hmm.
We're not external. And I think
So,
with our awareness, it's creating connections amongst the people rather than between the people, so that it's not about sides. It's more about a package deal, collaboration to help support people. And my experience with community mediation early on was like, having those conversations on the phone, doing those intakes and hearing people, and then finding a way to try to build the connection. And then people would, I'd measure some way what kinds of responses I got, what were more, and what did I have to keep doing to, shift my language to help connect. Again, recognizing the individuality of each person. It's not like to have a script to say the same thing, cookie cutter approach. It's to keep the adapting model to keep moving along and fluidly. And then when people found, when the words that we were using and the manner that we were saying it too, I think tone is important. And, the presentation of the verbal, that there's a higher probability for people to respond positively to at least you're presenting that you care. And that's the touch point where people will open up somewhat, still in increments because everybody's experience is different with safety to open up.
Yeah, I think there is a lot to be said in terms of your tone and the words that you use and exploring those connections with people in terms of, what certain words mean to them, or, just asking questions, being curious, sort of mediation 101 stuff, but there's a lot of truth behind it all. And I think it's easy to get away from some of those skills when we're too busy trying to get through the day, or maybe we've had a bad day ourselves and we just don't have a lot of time or patience with people. And so it's a continual, that consciousness, I'm going to slow myself down. I'm going to be present. I'm going to do these things. If I'm feeling frustrated with someone, I can feel the emotion, but I still have to help them navigate that emotion. There's a lot of stuff that's happening when we're working with folks, that's for sure.
Yeah. So with regard to, I referenced it earlier, self-awareness as a means or a tool to try to help create connection with people. What does actually that mean?
Can I go back to the days of the Bible? I'm actually going to go back to the days of the Bible.
Whatever makes sense for you.
So, couple stories to get to my story, all right? So, in graduate school 20 years ago, I did a lot of research. I spent 2 years of my life researching forgiveness. And actually, I differentiated forgiveness of self from forgiveness of others, because there's actually two different psychological processes that are taking place. And so at the time, forgiveness was not that well known. Actually, it's super abstract. It's a higher level functioning tool, if you will. And so it's very abstract. Like, how does one assess forgiveness? How do you know you've forgiven someone? So I actually had to create two assessments. I had to create a forgiveness of other measure, and I had to create a forgiveness of self measure. And there was some other measures that had been done before. And so I had to take the reliability and the validity of those and compare them with mine. Sorry, this is a lot of research talk. But thankfully, both my tools ended up they have validity and reliability. And so that was some amazing stuff that came out of that research, which was just crazy to me, though. That was in 2000. Like, we're talking about concepts like forgiveness that have been around literally since the Bible. And here we are in the year 2000, finding out now just how we can assess this sort of higher level abstract thinking word. So I've always found that to be interesting. And then when I found that Mariano Sigmund fellow on TED and his TED Talks, I watched them, and he had confirmed what my experience was. So he actually he looks at like a lot of linguistics, so look at words. So he does these, like, I don't know how he does it, but he's got this database that he enters all of these books into. And one of the books that he put in was the Bible. And he compared the Old Testament with the New Testament. And he started looking at introspection. basically, when did introspection really start to happen for people? And it wasn't until the New Testament, meaning like Old Testament was, there wasn't a lot of higher level thinking. People didn't really have thoughts about their thoughts, which is called like these metacognitions, which I have a funny story to tell you about metacognitions, but anyway. And actually people thought that God was talking to them. That was actually their thoughts at the time. There was confusion on where these voices were coming from. And he said, actually, if you look at old books, people like they kind of thought they had schizophrenia. Like there was a confusion on these voices, but actually was just their higher level thinking that they didn't know how to execute at the time. So now we get into, we're in BC. People are beginning to think about ourselves. We have this awareness, like we actually now know that the voices in our head are our own. Like, there's some basic fundamental stuff happening, which is just amazing. And we begin to ask these questions and we begin to look at these big concepts in terms of what is going on in my mind? What is happening within me? How do I execute these sort of higher level things? And I think it's amazing now because now, spring forward, here we are in 2021 having this podcast discussion about the subconscious mind, right? Like think about where we've been to where we are now in that time frame. So awareness is, at least I think, the first idea of awareness is that there are basically three, what do they call them? Three mind models. So you're looking at consciousness, you're looking at your subconscious, and then there's this unconscious layer. And all of them are impacting our daily lives all the time. And thinking about, though, that what those three mind models, how are they impacting this mediation session? And just the fact that we can sit here and even say that they exist is just brilliant. I think we've come that far, and just think about where we'll be 20 years from now. Maybe by then we'll have 5 mind models, or there'll be something new that's in the future in terms of discovery and understanding the brain and what's happening within us.
And I might say that might be the deep dive into mediation segment 384. I don't know.
But I really enjoyed his TED Talk because it really confirmed my thoughts on, introspection, just that word, and what does it mean to introspect? And then, now the big thing, and as it should be, is, as I was looking at these 3 levels of mind models, and now one of the big things that we have to be trained in our state is unconscious bias. And when you think about it, unconscious bias, we weren't talking about that like 2 years ago. We continue to develop and think about how the brain is exhibiting certain things. And I think it's amazing. I think it's growth, and I think it's development. And we're heading in the right direction as we begin to understand ourselves and others. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, pretty complex too.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It's a lot to sort through and try to make sense of.
I know. And you and I had this discussion, Greg. I said, I don't feel adequate or smart enough to even be talking about the subconscious, but we know that it's there. And you and I agreed that that's what makes this fun. We're just kind of 2 people trying to navigate what we think is happening at a little bit more deeper level with us and the parties.
Yeah. And, when, parties come into a room and the process, what's a question to ask is, they're supposed to share their stories, their perspectives, so that the other person to the matter situation can get informed, especially about things they didn't consider and they weren't aware of. I think it's also about the individual themselves to better connect with their own lived experiences too.
Yeah.
The thought that comes to mind is like, I didn't realize that was happening, or I was doing that, or I was actually, I'm getting an affect from just sharing this now. I didn't necessarily connect with it all. So how does a mediator, when people are trying to speak, how do they know what to ask to get them to speak, to share?
That's a sometimes, it's not just sometimes. I think that when we are able to listen, we just know. And I hate to give such a maybe cliche answer, but I feel like sometimes we're so busy thinking about next in our own lives, in the session. At least I know I am. My brain never stops, ever, ever, ever. Like it's always what's next? What problem can I solve next? And when I can shut down that chatter a little bit, which takes a lot of self control, self regulation, and I can just listen to people, then the conversation feels so natural. And then you can ask questions like, well, do you think that maybe that is tied to this right here? You're making these sort of quasi educated guesses that come in these reflections. And you're trying to connect and figure it out. And you're literally problem solving, almost like spitball. They call it spitballing back and forth between is this a possibility for this? Or did you feel this because of that? And people sometimes, and the fancy word for it is called spontaneous discovery. And it's actually a concept used in motivational interviewing, where just that series of questions, reflections, reframes, which is the same exact thing that we do as mediators, provides this moment of, spontaneous discovery. But it's not so spontaneous because you've been sitting there having a dialogue with them for X amount of time, but it is in theory spontaneous, like a
Yeah.
breakthrough.
There's a purpose. There's an intention that's
Yeah.
with the pathway that's, creating those conditions that through the connection and the relationship building that connects with trust and safety for people then to tap in, connect within, to then bring to the surface their deeper perspectives, their feelings, their thoughts. So from the subconscious and somewhat to the conscious level, that can be so profound in terms of creating for those light bulb moments.
Well, I mean, just think about, and there's so basically real quick, just to sort of sort through these three mind models, if you will. So the consciousness is everything that we're aware of, right? Like that's our thoughts, our behaviors, like we are aware of those levels. The subconscious is where it's just below. And the subconscious has its own benefits because you don't have to be mindful about everything that you're doing. So, an example would be actually your breathing is at the subconscious level. It's something that happens automatically, but you can have control over it and become mindful of it when you need to be in terms of regulating it, right? Like it's something that can be absolutely mindless. And then it's something that you can be mindful of when you need to be. And so that's the beauty of the subconscious, is that it's something that doesn't have to take all of your mental energy all the time, something that you don't have to think about. That's the cool side of it. The bad side of it is that sometimes we've got certain things, I call them the little information highways, little neural networks. You're traveling down the road of like things that have been moved to the subconscious that aren't always helpful or productive. And so, then we've got sort of this next layer, which is the unconscious, which is unfortunately sometimes that's where the triggers go. Trauma's not a memory, it's a reaction. And I think of the unconscious as a reaction to something. So, one of the examples I give, if you smell something and it pulls forth a reaction in you, that's something that's at the unconscious level. The tricky part is trying how to continually get these three levels to always work together. And sometimes you can't. I mean, but we can try. And that's sort of my whole goal and philosophy with this, is to figure out how can we try to work with these levels the best way that we can.
To create that continuum of connection.
Yeah.
That really is about awareness and being able to tap into that in a more intentional way, so that it's not as reactive, it's more proactive or responsive in some way that we can.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't ever want to sound like you're lecturing with your parties. But sometimes just a fun discussion on the brain that doesn't have to take very long in terms of like why they might be doing something that's not helpful. Or if it's something that they want to change and it's tough, then that's partly why I got into trying to understand so many therapies that help rewire the brain. Because some people are really frustrated with how their brain reacts and they want to change that. And that was heartbreaking for me. So earlier you mentioned vicarious trauma. Oh gosh, there was a really good book I had read a handful of years ago on secondary trauma. Oh, it's called Trauma Stewardship. That's the word, that's the book. And real quick story about, I just was forever touched by this story in the book. And these EPA, so there's a lot of environmentalists that have post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm going to tell you why. And it'll totally click once you hear the story.
Okay.
So there was some EPA, these environmentalists, they go to these, I think it was like a tropical rainforest, and their job was to sort of save these lizards. And as they're there over time, the lizards are slowly dying, and these environmentalists cannot save them. They cannot save the lizards. They know that they're dying. So when you begin to think about the brain, when it's in a situation in which it cannot control the environment, right? It can't stop what's happening. You have these feelings of helplessness, all of these things. So the actual trauma was happening to the lizards because they were going extinct, and they did eventually. And the EPAs came back. And the tricky part is that when you have all these doctorate level researchers, they're not going to really acknowledge that this lizard going extinct is what's caused them this sort of trauma response that they're having. But that's exactly, so then the lizard was the one having the trauma, and the EPA, the environmentalists, are the ones having the secondary response to this, right? So all of these, there's a whole slew of people who are continually exposed, but that's what I felt like was happening for me as a mediator. Sometimes I was sitting in this room with these people who felt completely out of control. They were responding in ways that were just beyond what I would call, I hate to use the word normal, but it's out of proportion to events. Things are just off the scale. And so then I was having these responses or these feelings of like hopelessness, helplessness. How do I help these people? I need to know of resources. I need to know what's going on within them. And that was also part of like what helped me start to learn about the body, and then also trying to learn of different therapies, because the old days, it used to be, your brain was bad. Well, good luck to you.
Well, go into that institution, the sanitarium,
Yes.
and
Do some shock therapy.
Live your life, whatever it's going to be,
Yes.
and stay out of the rest of us.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't feed us that bad stuff. So we want to be healthy. Yeah.
So thank God, here we are in 2021. We've got more resources, and when we begin to use these really fun words like neuroplasticity, and we, I've learned of so many treatments now that help the brain heal itself, that it's absolutely amazing. And anyway, I think that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about today, but I think it's just, people don't have to feel helpless and hopeless anymore.
Well, there's opportunity. Yeah, that's the reframe, that barriers and impasses.
Yeah.
Traditionally, we're seen as let's walk away around them, avoid them, evade them. Now let's try and go into them to see how it's an opportunity possibly to learn, grow, and develop. What would you say about micro moments versus macro moments in regard to surfacing the deeper pieces?
So a confession, I think Greg and I came up with this concept, didn't we? We looked this up. We
Yeah.
We had a good conversation. All right, I'll tell some of the story. So I'm the director for a statewide mediation program, and we do pre-mediation assessment, meaning we ask the people on a scale of 1 to 5, hey, rate your ability to resolve conflict with this other person. And people they tell me like a 1 or a 2. They tell our intake staff. Then post mediation, we do a post mediation evaluation. We ask them the same exact question on a scale of 1 to 5. What's your ability to rate conflict with this other person? And they say a 3 or a 4. And so part of what I was wondering, or what something to think about, was at what point does this person have this psychological shift of change? Like, at what point do you say, I'm a 1 or a 2, I hate your guts, to you're a 3, 4, and you might be all right? And actually, people were saying, I think we could probably do this by ourselves now in the future. And you're like, what the heck? What's happening here? So, you begin to wonder, is there like some sort of psychological shift, like in the beginning or in the middle, or is it at the end, or is it sort of this post mediation aha reflection, like maybe I could, who knows? And so I do think it's more of a series of what Greg and I called micro moments. So I said micro moments, and then we Googled it and we were like, is this a thing? I think it's a thing. And we decided it's our thing. So we're
Yeah.
going to copyright it and come up
Well,
with
we're putting it out there now.
Yeah, we're going to do this. So I think that in our mind, so we're defining it right now as we want to. Because micro moments, I think there's some financial definitions, but we're not doing it. We're not explaining it that way. We're applying it to mediation. But it's a series of things, a series of whether it's verbals, nonverbals, things that are happening within the mediation session where people maybe are having these connections, and the brain is maybe saying, I think I might be safe with you, or I think I can do this decision now. And that's where the secret life of the mind has been sort of coming into my brain with this is, there's also like the chemical components, but just, it's a series of steps for the brain, and, information is coming in, information is going out. Dan Siegel actually has a fantastic word. It's a phrase. It's called interpersonal neurobiology, which I think is amazing in the sense of my brain body is responding based upon my interactions with you, and vice versa. And that's what I think.
A flow.
It's a flow, interpersonal neurobiology. Isn't that just gorgeous? And so that's what I think of in terms of it's a series of micro moments that people have. And I think it's our job as a mediator to facilitate those micro moments. And we don't even always know that they're happening. And that's where I think this subconscious stuff is coming into play, because you're having these micro moments or these little things that are happening. And then all of a sudden, now you ask a question and you're trying to do some problem solving. And people are continuing still to have micro moments and navigate each other till they're reaching agreement. It's this like a dance of some sort that I think is happening between you and them.
Well, we talked about the 3 dimensions. Really.
Yeah.
Us, or I don't know, maybe more. So us within ourselves,
Yeah.
us with the parties or people in the room, them with themselves, and then also them with each other.
I feel like I don't do mushrooms or acid, but I felt like if I did mushrooms or acid, this would be a really good conversation to have on that, thinking about the dimensions, the multiple layers, things that I think you could maybe see a little bit better in an altered state.
Are you promoting hallucinogenic mediation?
That's it, hallucinogenic. There's actually some research now that's coming out on that, but it's got to be in a controlled environment. I am not condoning the use of acid by no means.
Spaced out mediator, yeah.
I know. That's what we need to do in mediation. Everybody just
continue with your thoughts. I will minimize my.
Oh shoot. Oh, that went off rails. So you're having this sort of these micro moments with the party, actually with each party, they're happening with each other. There's this collective dynamic. Everyone's having an interaction with
Mm-hmm.
within the dynamic itself. Yeah, there's a lot. There's part of what I think you and I had talked about, Greg, too, was sort of this intrapersonal and the interpersonal responses that are happening as well. And that's part of that micro moment concept as well, is my interpersonal actions with you are affecting me at this intrapersonal level. And I think it's things that we should just at least think about. Is I don't know how it can always be applied per se, but I definitely think it's interesting.
I
I think,
think it relates to the conversation. It's really about us opening up to define, to discern what's happening in the room, in the
yeah,
process, what's happening for us, with us, what's happening for the individuals who are there, to more deeply, raise that awareness and that connection, the belonging, the relationship, and the trust. I think it's all part of the journey.
yeah, and I don't know if this was a micro moment. I'm still trying to define exactly, because I think they're smaller. I think they're actually smaller than what I'm getting ready to tell you. But I was doing a Zoom mediation, and the fun thing I think about Zoom. So they asked me if they could smoke a cigarette, each of them, and I said, yeah, sure, because they're all out in the world, doing their own thing. And so they had been fighting for about an hour and a half. Um, the child is 7. I do domestic mediations, and dad is just now joining into this child's life. And so the first hour and a half was basically who's to blame for why there wasn't two parent involvement. And so that fight could have gone on forever. And thankfully, somebody said, can we smoke a cigarette? And it was this, they both had just like connected at this level that would have never happened in a mediation session had it been in person. And they smoked their cigarette, and you could feel them just totally release. You could feel their postures change. And, there's the fancy concept of what's called mirror neurons, where when people are feeding off of each other in terms of what they're experiencing, I
Uh-huh.
think their mirror neurons were working. I think that there was this interpersonal neurobiology component of watching them smoke cigarette together. I swear to God, when they finished smoking that cigarette, they put it out. We had the best 30 minutes after, and we mediated a whole parenting plan. It was absolutely insane. I think, I don't know if they would have got to have that moment, but I think there was something that was continuing to happen as they continued to smoke their cigarette and have that connection. I don't know if it was, I know it's weird to call that a connection, but it was.
I totally connect with that.
Yeah.
When people come in, they're positional. They're right and the other one's wrong. And that's what, if you ask all the parties, that's the perspective generally. It's positional. And then they're looking to try to promote, I'm right, you're wrong, and fit into my box. And that's what you ask the other person, they'll say the same thing.
Yeah.
And getting people to shift from that whole mindset and approach of positions to interests. People, again, with the positions, it's divergent. What's different about us that keeps us apart? Rather than reframing it, what is it about us that actually we have a connection or a relationship of some
Yeah.
form with? So
Yeah.
shifting the narrative so it becomes convergent.
And now that we're talking about this subconscious, unconscious, you have to wonder, I'm sure that when they were together, because they were together for a while, I'm sure they would probably sit and smoke cigarettes together and have like conversations together that were probably very hard conversations. Or they probably experienced things in life sharing cigarettes together. And so maybe that experience took them to something that I wasn't even aware of what was happening.
Yeah, where they have that connection
Yeah.
and they identify that as a positive thing, because
Could have. Yeah.
that's when we could work together. And even if we were different, we are different, we still find a way to connect. And as they saw that visually of each other,
Yeah.
connected with that past sense of experience that would be now something ever present, rather than seeing the other as a opposition or that person. Oh, it's like the mind's playing.
Well, and there is nothing that I could have said as a mediator that would have made that shift. I'm just going to
I
say
will
that.
I will say this though, you provided the conditions to be
Yeah.
ripe for that to materialize and happen.
Yeah.
And that's your contribution. And that
Yeah.
That can be so profound. I mean, those
Well,
micro things can be
and
so profound.
it's funny that you say that because we actually have some mediators who are appalled that the parties are smoking during the mediation session. In my mind, now that I've had that, I'm like, smoke away. You do you.
In fact, supply cigarettes in the room. No, I mean, it's not, I know what you're saying. It's
Yeah,
really, people have this construct of the process.
I agree.
And again, we're pushing back at take away that word the and say this is a way to do it. It doesn't need to be the only way. There's a variety, and I think the more we can inject in terms of variety into the room for each individual to connect with self in relation to another, we're maximizing for the macro. So all these little steps on the micro that will contribute to the macro.
Absolutely.
So we're anybody in the crowd want to ask something or share a comment or something? Like, yeah. All right. So it's all silence in the room. And again, we really promote about silence, right? Because it's an opportunity for reflection.
We're going to sit in the silence.
Yeah. We'll see how Laura likes silence. Come on, talk, get it going.
She's doing her nails.
So, okay. So we're going to close out very soon.
Yep.
So what's going through your mind as we've had this conversation? And this is the third piece.
I had a lot. Oh wait, what was the name of the first book you mentioned by Mario? Okay, so this guy, Mariano Sigman, Mariano, and then Sigman. He's got this one's called The Secret Life of the Mind. And he's got like 3 TED Talks. And he does a lot on like decision making, group think decision making, topics that I think are relevant for mediators to think about.
Yep.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right. So what thoughts are going through your mind in terms of the conversation today?
I don't know. I guess in terms of like today, I think tonight was fun. Anyway, not like you care about my thoughts on that, but I do.
Are you making an assumption there?
I always make that assumption. I think anyway, I want to just me on a personal level. I certainly think that I just want to keep diving into better understanding the brain, but that has nothing to do with where I think you're going with this in terms of like next. Are you thinking about like the next interview or the next session, I guess, or what are you thinking?
It's conversations.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, conversations. That's right.
Yeah.
And they're good conversations.
Well, I'm biased. I would say so. You know, it depends how the crowd reacts. I can't hear anybody booing or hissing or even clapping. So, because of course their mics are closed.
They're muted.
Oh, that's helpful for us to control the space, create the conditions that are conducive for us.
Oh my gosh. That's fun.
No, it's for, just I wanted to understand from your point of view, for the benefit of to other people who will view this afterward, where's Dawn at with regard to what she's presented in some way without really going, full spectrum on that. This is to provide space to question what we do.
Yeah.
And question how we do it too.
I think the fun thing about today, well, it's just like when I started thinking about this trauma-informed mediation model. It's just you sit down and you're with some people and you just talk about an idea, and then you just keep finding more ways to build upon that idea. And I feel like, honestly, today was just the first of what I think is going to be a series of more learning and better understanding. And like you said, maybe 20 years from now, we'll do, part 754 of the 5 levels of the mind, because I think it's something, it's just, we're going to keep growing and better understanding. And that's the exciting part about it.
Yeah, I think we take on the idiom, how can we do things better?
Yeah.
Keep building upon with the concept of improvisation. It's like There's something, and then it's not the but, it's an and. So what can we do to keep building upon, building the staircase, building the foundation to the first floor to the second floor? All
And then
those,
and by the time next time you see me, I'll have a whole definition of micro moments. We'll have that defined.
you develop that, yeah. Well, I mean, that's you and I have these off-camera stuff, well,
Yeah.
off-show stuff that
Yeah.
we just brainstorm. We have a topic, something minor, or and then we unpack that and we just go with it. And that's when we come back into presenting these thoughts and to really challenge the norm, the traditions.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
fun. That's where the fun is.
yeah. So, person said they'll read the book and they appreciate this consideration as always. Just to acknowledge, make sure that you're acknowledged. That's
Thank you.
part of my need to do. Um, what's next? Okay. What would you like people to understand about the conversation? Is there some kind of snapshot statement or expression?
Probably that there are always things happening at a level that people don't know. And sometimes we might be able to tap into that, sometimes we won't. And I think that's also part of, when people, just to kind of take this both ways, when people leave and they're not ready to commit to an agreement to something, it's because you've only seen so I have to take a piece of paper and you as a mediator get like this much of their story, in that little time frame. And so there's so much more that's often going on with people. And so I think I don't want people to ever, or mediators to ever feel like they have to get an agreement or reach an agreement. And just because we don't know, and they may not even know yet in terms of like what's going on internally within them. And maybe they have some stuff they need to work through, and maybe they'll be ready to reach an agreement after that. But I think pushing people too fast too soon can be really detrimental to everyone in the process. And I think that we have to just understand that sometimes people have to process it at their own time, in their own way. And if we can help speed that process along, I think that's great. But I just don't want people feeling like that they're a failure or that they didn't do the job because someone just wasn't at the right place yet. That's
Yeah,
the other
yet.
part.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's all about change, moments, processing, making sense to then connect
Yeah.
better. You know, uh, I really encouraged as a case manager that the space is actually not even with the full intention that people had to get resolution, create a memorandum of understanding. It's to provide at least a space for people to come together to start a journey to open up. And then every person will decide for themselves. And I think that's the quality and the value of self-determination, self-empowerment, that people ideally have ownership. And rather than trying to fit into our box, our construct of what they need to do, there's a higher probability from my experience that people, when they can create their own shape and form, and there's a higher probability they'll find that clarity that they need to make the decisions they then and the whole concept with time is relative to the
I
individual.
know. Sometimes I think it's just my job to we just planted a little seed. And then sometimes they come back 3 months later and they're ready to do everything that they had talked about, but they just needed that time to process it. The other part of this, we had when we did our post evaluations, post mediation evaluations, even when people did not reach an agreement, everyone was very still complimentary about the mediator and or the process. And I think that that's important to make sure that those are two separate things in terms of, everything that we've talked about today is bringing a good quality process, right? People want to feel heard. You navigate them, you help them create a safe, you create a safe space, you do all these things. If they don't reach an agreement, they know that that is something different than what you did. So that was a theme that we see in our mediation results in terms of post mediation evaluations. And I think that that's something to keep in mind too, that your job is to bring a really good quality process. And people are going to know and respect that even if they don't reach an agreement
And I'll just add on at that time.
at that time.
It
And
may,
but if anything, then they'll come back to you. You did a really good job with us. We didn't reach an agreement, but you did a really good job with us. And those are nice words,
yeah, that's where you have a sense of valuing yourself and what you
Yeah.
do, because I think there's a lot of times we question ourselves and did we do something to undermine
Yes.
things?
What did I do? What could I have done better? They didn't reach an agreement. Blah, blah.
Yeah, that's how
Yeah.
I measure outcomes in terms
Yes.
of the
Oh.
agreements that come to fruition with a definitive construct. Yeah.
We have some mediators that say like 98% success rate on their business cards.
Well, so I would shift it. So what happened to the other 2%?
I'd be like, I have a 25% success rate, but all my people love me.
Yeah, so quantify it with value for the dollar or whatever the process. Yeah, it's all relative. Anyways.
I don't know how, anyway, it's kind of funny.
Yeah. So anything to say in parting?
That's it. Thank you for this opportunity, Greg. It's fun as always.
Likewise, appreciate it very much. So we'll be in touch.
Okay.
We'll just present it. Thank you, Dawn, for coming back tonight. Thank you, Greg. And of course, thank you everyone who has joined us. Have a good night. So yeah, we're going to chill and move on, and we'll see you next time. So thanks, Dawn. Be well.
Bye. Thank
Take
you.
care. All right. Bye, everyone else in the crowd. Appreciate your attendance. Bye-bye.